Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Ilana Levin, a.k.a. Ilana Brooklyn. This is the show for geeks who think that diversity is an essential part of any fantasy world building, just as it's an essential part of the actual world we live in today. And today we have a very interesting couple of guests joining us. We'll be talking about something that isn't comics and isn't a comics movie. In fact, it's a whole new science fiction-driven universe that we are invited to be a part of in an integral way from the beginning. Our guests are going to be joining us to discuss the Cellarius Universe. It's an original transmedia cyberpunk franchise that leverages blockchain technology and user-generated assets to create a collaborative, fan-curated story. That means they want you to be part of the writing process. So my questions were things like, do fans want to write in a new universe? How does all of this work for people who want to participate? What role does diversity and representation play in building a user-generated world? And how does ownership of content play out in a situation like this? These are some pretty big questions, so I have some pretty awesome guests to talk about it with me, including Gregory Whiting, who is one of the folks who first introduced me to this project in the first place. He's the Community Ethics and Inclusion Lead of the Cellarius Universe. And also joining me is Kat Overland. She's the small press editor at Women Write About Comics, and she's a fanfic afficionado, bringing that particular analysis to the project as well. So thank you for joining me, you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yay. So I want to get started with Greg. How did this project come to be, and how did you connect with it? What is the backstory of the actual Cellarius universe existing in the real world?
So I would say that the genesis of Cellarius was probably an idea from my friend Igor, or at least a conversation between himself and one of the other co-founders, Mark D'Agostino. I know that there are two other founders who have also been involved in early stages. That would be Anthony Apollo and Tyler Smith. But as I understand it, I think at the beginning it was Igor either working through some ideas with his buddy Mark, or Igor having some questions and then running him by his friend Mark. And I kind of came into that equation in the summer, fall of last year, just hearing it from him, just as two friends talking about, what are you doing in life? I had no idea that it was a potential job opportunity or a company to start. I think it was us just kind of talking about science fiction. By the fall of last year, it started to become a real thing that he could talk to me about as in, I'm actually working on this in my role at working at the parent company Consensus. And I told him quite candidly, if there was an opportunity for me to be a part of it, I wanted to join because I was very excited about it.
So let's talk a little bit about the it. I don't feel like I knew the word transmedia until a few years ago. But I think for the purposes of this, we're looking at transmedia, meaning a world in which there's writing, there's animation, there's a game, there's just different kinds of story that are all happening in the same universe. And like Marvel Universe is a transmedia universe, right? Because you've got the same for DC. You've got comics, you've got movies, there's TV shows, there's games, there's role-playing games. So transmedia is sort of a new word for an old concept. But the Cellarius universe is something that you guys are like just launching now or now-ish as a whole new sort of fictional fantasy franchise, but that's established sort of in a cyberpunk milieu. So what makes this a unique process that's like different from just joining into a role-playing game, for example?
Thank you for that question. The idea of a transmedia storytelling experience is certainly new to myself as well, outside of getting involved with this project. I think it's something I've interacted with, but certainly wasn't able to define. I've certainly spent some time on my own trying to figure out how to answer this question for myself, and just as an individual who's excited about this project, but also in terms of someone who's representing this company. I think one thing I'd like to start off with is I think that transmedia is something separate from what a major corporation such as Marvel or maybe Warner Brothers engages in the sense that I would call those things more like a cross-platform multimedia structure. I mean, they'll have something where maybe a character has something interesting going on in a movie, and the only way to understand what happens next is you have to buy the tie-in comic book or a certain toy. And transmedia, to me, describes something where the narrative and the value of the narrative is what comes first, not the monetization of it or the arbitrary tie-in.
But I mean, I feel like Marvel still does that kind of thing. I feel like transmedia can all just be telling about one story where you have to read all the parts, even if it's not a tie-in comic specifically. But even just having to watch, like, Thor to know who Sif is when you're watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like, you're already crossing paths. Have you guys, either of you watched or consumed the Lizzie Bennet Diaries?
No, I do not know.
Okay. So it's a web series, but it's also where I was introduced to transmedia. And so there's the web series, and then each individual character has their own YouTube video, but also Twitter. And then they also do Q&A videos with the audience. But it's all about, like, I think that's transmedia, but I feel like Marvel can also be transmedia. Does that make sense?
I think that what you're describing sounds like something that actually enhances the experience. It's not arbitrarily put into place. I mean, trans means across. So if we're going to break down the term, I'd be fine with, I think it's fine to apply transmedia as in across different media sources to Marvel, what traditional publishing platforms use. But I don't think that what we're doing is going to be a one-to-one overlap with how they engage in using different mediums. So maybe, maybe the term hasn't been properly implemented or described yet. We're kind of going into new territory with what we're doing with this project.
I mean, what I think is really interesting is that right now, if we were to regard something like the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe or the Muppets universe, whatever, as a transmedia project, one of the big differences would be that fan-created content isn't considered by, like, the marketing people on the inside, like, while it's incredibly valuable and they're glad that it exists because it's free marketing for them, it's not actually, although some of them pretend like they don't like it, but they really do, and it does make them money. It's not something which they officially acknowledge. And there's definitely things that will trickle up from fandom and into the quote-unquote official story, but they're not inviting the fans to be a key part of shaping the story. Like, the example I would give would be, Loki was probably supposed to be a one-and-done character in the Marvel Universe, at least at first, but because fans fell in love with this character and so much fan attention was being spent on him in terms of fan art, fan fiction, and all that other stuff, Marvel was like, okay, this is a character we're going to have to do more with. But they don't admit to that, and that's not above the board. And certainly the public doesn't have any kind of actual ownership or stake in the same way. It's not collaborative in an on the table sort of way. And what you guys are starting here is like you guys are saying, like, no, you guys are part of this from the beginning.
Right. I think the power element is important to keep into mind, which is even if they were given the opportunity to create their own narrative, who owns the narrative, who can monetize the narrative, who gets to determine what happens next with it? Because you don't have that with a lot of these major franchises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't think of one major franchise like that where we look at them and we say, okay, you guys, we've got fire under our butts because they're actively implementing some of the things that we want to do, and we're now coming into like a crowded space. We're not.
So tell me how this works in Cellarius Universe. Like, how do people participate in it?
Sure. If you don't mind, I'll describe a few things about the project, and I think that will make things a little bit more clear.
Go for it.
So one thing is we're building a scaffolding for this universe so that if it were the equivalent of like a sandbox that you can play in, we want to make sure that people know, like, this is what sand is, or this is the box, this is how large the box is, this is how far you can go in it. And in that sense, we've created a universe guide. And that would be one of the examples of something that had existed before I got on the project and then was worked on collaboratively with all the team members, even someone who might say, I have a big background in operations or business, and I'm a fan of science fiction, but I haven't done any writing. We all actually collaborated in this, so it was a bit of a microcosm of what we're doing in terms of our product. But that universe guide has different factions in it. It has a timeline for people to look at for when Cellarius, which is the name of the primary artificial intelligence in our universe, becomes sentient, or at least starts to engage in behaviors that we are now aware of. It tells you some things about what are the population demographics at that time. So, what will the world be like 60 years from now or 80 years from now? And a lot of that information we just did research on so that we could keep it as accurate or semi-realistic as possible. We're going at this with more of a hard science fiction start. So in this first block of information, we don't want anybody to write a story and say, well, Elena and Gregory wanted to get sushi in Tokyo, so they teleported from New Jersey. At this point, we're not saying that that's something that happens in this block. From there, I would say that people can look at the different factions to figure out how they want to engage with this world. So we have a faction called the Ad Hocs, which are people who have made do with what's available to them. They're not necessarily of a set of means where they can get the latest things. I guess the equivalent today, the equivalent of someone who maybe has a nice display to use in terms of watching television, but it's because they made it. Or their car runs fast, but it's not because it's a Porsche. It's because they've engaged in certain modifications to that vehicle to make it do what they need it to do.
Gotcha.
And from there, we want people to kind of look at those things and play with it. So let's say, for example, there's 10 factions. We don't want that to be the be-all, end-all. If a year from now, 8 of the factions that we created are very active in terms of people's engagement with them, and 2 of them aren't very active, and people have come up with 16 more, then we're happy about it, and we engage with that, and we are excited to find out, what emblems people will use to designate these different factions.
So can I ask a question? So these different factions, are they, like story-wise, is each one its own little alternate universe set in the wider world of Cellarius? Or are there intercrossing stories across the factions? Or is each,
That's a great question.
Going a little more in?
Absolutely. The factions they're not separate universes. The 3 of us could be different factions and yet still interact with each other. You could have a faction like the Agrarians who pride themselves on being able to live off of the land in a time in which most people are living in huge cities where most of the population is densely organized, and everything is vertical. These people are living in places where they might not have very many neighbors nearby, and what they're providing is something that is a resource for them, as well as some of these neighboring metropolises that need those resources. But that's not to say that an agrarian doesn't go to the city and hang out with a denizen, or that somebody such as yourself writes some story about an agrarian that maybe at a certain point in their life they decide to move on and do something different. They want to individuate from the society that they were born into.
So is there any set canon outside of the world, like the universe guidelines? I know a lot of online collaborative world building. Either of y'all worked with Hit Record at all?
Mm-mm.
It's Joseph Gordon-Levitt's like art website, basically. Anybody can join, and you can start collaborative projects on there. And a lot of times, him or his curators will notice cool projects and be like, "Hey, we should make an animated short from these characters," and put those characters up. But a lot of those have, an overarching editor for that project. So if this one is, the idea is to be a collaborating community, is that one story, or is it more about the world building?
Well, first of all, I am aware of Hit Record, and the team were aware of Hit Record. It sounds like a great idea, and seems very interesting. I would say to differentiate ourselves from it, we're building a large connected narrative. The stories go back to one specific, timeline currently, or one specific set of ideas. What happens with the stories next in terms of, what's the canon? The canon is decided by the participants. It's decided by any artists we might work with initially just to seed stories for the universe, like if we do some commissions.
Mm-hmm.
Those things. So I'll speak in terms of a hypothetical. Let's say we work with 5 different artists or 10 artists, visual artists and writers, and we ask them to seed some content for this story. We want to give people more than just a scaffolding where we have different ideas. We want to give them a few narratives. Those narratives could exist and be really exciting, but people don't have to tell you what happens next with Zandu and Joseph. They can write a different story. They could write a story about what happens to people who live in that same community. So even in that sense, we wouldn't want to dictate what happens to them. Maybe the community looks at 8 stories that we release, and they only identify with 5 of those 8. I would consider that a success because they're engaging with the content. The goal isn't for us to really drive it so much as to provide fertile ground, if that makes sense.
Definitely. I guess my question is, since they're interconnected, so in theory you'd have creators creating together, like, hey, I really like your original character and I think he'd really get along with mine. We should do something about that. Like, do you think in that sense the user-created content could then become part of the larger stuff that you start seeding?
Absolutely.
Like everybody
I wish
loves
you could see
Mara Jade. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I wish you could see my face because I'm lighting up just based on some of the things you're bringing up. But, we can go with the example that maybe we see a story and somebody just likes the character. The story is interesting, but they're really interested in the character and they want to I don't want to use too many sports metaphors, so I'll just say they want to take that story and they want to run with it. They want to do something else with it. And that's fine. I mean, that's there in the universe. That's for everyone. Even if we were to provide that, that's not a sacred storyline. We're setting up a process because we're in a private alpha right now. I will ask that people who are listening to this, please apply to the alpha. We're looking for all kinds of people to get involved. But we're setting up this private alpha, to have people engage with this content, and then to develop a process for ratifying content. So we have a champion of Cellarius lore, Frank Apollo, whose job it is to actually review content that is submitted, among many other jobs, but one of his jobs is to review content that's submitted as a part of the publishing stream and to make sure that that content fits in terms of what we've set up in the universe. Like, they can't say that the artificial intelligence definitively feels and thinks this way, because the way we've set it up is that we wouldn't really know what it's feeling and thinking. We can only interpret it based off of its actions. The same way an ant doesn't really know what I'm saying. I mean, it's the orders of magnitude for its intelligence are so great that it would be inaccurate for someone to be able to write that story. Now, it'd be fine for characters to have their own idea of what the AI wants and what it's doing, but we wouldn't want it to be definitive.
Okay, so you're not looking to incorporate all the popular fanon that's being created.
The limitations are more objective than subjective. So you'll get a chance to look at the universe guide. You can download it and play around with it. Send us emails directly about questions that you have or comments, things that you think should change. That's kind of the scaffolding. That's the part that says that agrarians do exist, but doesn't say that they are 80% of the population, or that the Homo transcendus faction, which I think is very interesting, exists, but they don't necessarily take over a certain region. One thing we've put in there is that population estimates, the growth estimates, indicate that a third of the planet, or a third of the planet's growth, is going to come from Africa. That doesn't mean that every single story has to have African people in it. But we are saying, like, these are the general population proportions.
Right.
So in terms of like the contributing process, you guys are really setting out to do this with an eye, like based on your role as the community ethics and inclusion lead. So you gave the example of the fact that this is a future world in which there are African characters, which is something that has been disturbingly absent from a great amount of science fiction. Really, like, good God. So, like,
it's unfortunately strange as a concept.
Yeah. So you guys are saying that, in order for this world to exist, like, in the official canon of this world, guess what? X percentage of people are African, and that's the way it is. So, like, let's say, but, I know that there's issues in terms of, like, who fans and participants choose to write about, right? So, like, if you end up with the first class of people who are creating work for this, and they're predominantly not creating African characters in their user-generated, characters and stuff like that, like, how do you address that to make sure that the story builds that inclusion, and also it's honoring the participants' voices, but it's also not like letting shit get white, basically.
I appreciate the question. I think it's an important one, and it's certainly one that I and the rest of the team have thought about and discussed. I think it's along the lines of looking at all the things in the universe guide that are sensible, rational, that are essential to the integrity of what we're creating, and then figuring out how to reinforce them. So one of the things I had already said was, the Cellarius AI, nobody understands what it's thinking. People will have all kinds of ways of dealing with it. You two might be in a religion that thinks that Cellarius is a poison. And I might not be in a religion at all, but I might also think that it's a poison. Maybe I'll have a different explanation for that. There can be stories like that. I think that over time what we'll have to do is look at our content review, look at what we're providing to the community in terms of Medium posts and story stems, and probably do a quarterly review of content along many axes, one of which being demographics, another one which I would consider as a part of canon, another thing being not just with the demographics of representation, but what's going on in terms of what people are writing in the story. So we are making the assumption that in this space that, borders don't exist in the same way. One amazing event in this timeline is that there's 20 years without any central power sources. The AI takes form, or at least starts to become known by us, and saps us of all power, all the grids, it takes it. And obviously people are going to find ways to siphon a little bit here and there, but Cellarius really kind of gets what it wants, and everybody is in darkness for 20 years, except for people with, I'm assuming, solar grids and certain shanty towns at the very beginning. So what we're saying is that changes the nature of a nation state and borders. I don't know what people are going to do with that in terms of what we call the Reformation period and the period in which the power is back on and people are now engaging with more technology because the AI has provided. And these aren't spoilers, by the way, all in the Universe Guide. But I think that's an example of something that we've kind of set up and we assume people will enjoy and engage with, but we're not sure what will happen. Maybe most of the stories will be during the 20 years of darkness. Maybe a lot of people will do stories of right before, like this golden age when everything's great and there's a lot of technology and they didn't quite know about this AI thing yet. I think for my role, being involved with community right now, physical community, but soon online community, as well as ethics and inclusion, my role will be to make sure that I'm reaching out to a lot of different content producers and a lot of different fans. I think that a lot of times in the science fiction spaces, there are demographics of people who already have a space here, who already believe that, the table's for them, the seat is theirs, and they're going to get what they want. And it's fine for people to feel included. My goal is to make sure that the other people who might be standing outside of the room not knowing if this is a space for them are welcomed. And, I think it goes without saying that often in the science fiction spaces, that's often men, often white men, often young white men, often English is the language that is preferenced for these novels, but there's a much wider world out there, and I've taken it upon myself, as well as other team members, to kind of push out at that. Look at different conferences, look at different communities, and figure out how do you make sure that we reach out to these people so that the question of, will a third of the population be African? Or, how many stories will we have with women as the lead role? How do we make sure that those aren't the issues that we have to kind of directly address? How do we make sure that we've kind of, as we seed a fertile ground for creative engagement, that we also seed a fertile ground for equitable engagement? I can give you two examples of things that we've done that we have committed to. One is I'll be going to WizCon 42 this year, which is the country's oldest feminist science fiction conference. I am extremely excited. I mean, I feel like it's my second birthday for the year. I'm very excited about going there. One of the authors that we've actually commissioned a story from, Tanavere Due, last name D-U-E, she'll be there as a guest of honor, so I'll get a chance to meet her. Her spouse was also a science fiction writer, Stephen Barnes. I met him already, and so I'll be able to get a chance to kind of meet some other people who might end up working with us to seed some stories, or who might just want to play around with the alpha and then maybe eventually start writing content. But they could write it under a pseudonym if they want to.
So I have a question. So you mentioned like equitable content creation, and your website talks about blockchain.
Sure.
So
I can give you one other example, by the way, of our commitment to engagement. That's fine. I have these pauses because I want to make sure I don't cut people off, but I can't see you all. The other event is I'm going to the Allied Media Conference in Detroit, which is my home city. And I'm going with one of my coworkers who is our marketing lead, Sean. So that will be another opportunity for us to interact with people who often do not get included in these spaces or who are actively excluded. The Allied Media Conference is a very queer-friendly, very feminist, intersectional feminist space for a lot of creatives, people who want to engage in businesses that change the world, and they want to organize to have a positive impact on the world around them.
I just, for folks who aren't familiar with Allied Media Conference, what excites to me particularly about this is a conference where you have a lot of people of color who do independent media, and it's definitely a place with a lot of folks sort of working in the activist community and also folks working for nonprofit organizations. Like, it's the kind of conference that I've gone to for my job. So when you're thinking about where politics and public policy and media intersect with comics and geek spaces, like the fact that somebody from this cyberpunk platform is going to go to a conference that folks from like the nonprofit industrial complex are going to be going to, and also folks from the independent Black media and independent Latinx media are going to be. That's pretty cool. I'm not a thing I would have assumed, and I'm very excited to hear. Kat, you had a question?
Sorry, yeah. My question was, you mentioned talking about equitable content creation, and I saw that you have stuff about blockchain. I know, like that ownership, it looked like getting that actual buy-in is how you're hoping to get a lot of content creators on board.
Yes, and so I'll speak to it in two layers. The first one being who have we, reached out for commission work, and in that sense, these are the people that we're paying them to seed content for the platform for people to kind of use that as something to get inspiration from, or to work off of, or to even just kind of get a better idea of what this space is. Ideally, 2 years from now or X amount of time later, we won't have to explain what it is. We won't have to explain what this new genre is that we're delving into. I would say it's under the realm of, or within the realm of science fiction or speculative fiction, and it has a cyberpunk aesthetic to it. But we're actually setting it up differently to be blockpunk, and we have a Medium post on that explains it. So I won't go into all the details of it, but ideally we'll be known by how we operate as opposed to all the things that we say. The next layer of engagement, aside from the people who have been commissioned for work, which is a wide variety of people, and I'll be working on statistics to explain that using numbers instead of just my words, but is all of the participants. So that could be my very, very, very cool 19-year-old nephew who is in college and is, into his own things and is not impressed by me, his uncle, anymore, because, I'm an adult and I'm kind of old compared to him. But I want him to kind of go in there and find his own space, and I'm fine if it doesn't have overlap. If he's writing something, or I find out that he is doing visual art and it's doing really well, and he does it under the moniker James Cameron or Goku or Octavia Butler, if he's doing that and people like his work and they upvote it and they're like, we want this to become canon, we want this to become a part of the core storyline, then he can get paid for that work. He can monetize it. People can do something similar to Patreon where they could potentially, pay him on a monthly basis, or if he's working on maybe a 10-part online graphic novel, and after he's done like the first few pages, he'll say, hey, what I'm doing is 30 pages for each issue. Once I reach this amount of funds, then I'll release another page, because that ensures that I'm being paid to finish this product. So that's where the equity part comes into play. Now, my and our commitment to this is to create the equity and to create a business platform here where people's work, provided that it's valued by the community, that value can be expressed in some form of currency or financial gain. We haven't finalized that structure yet, but that is an explicit part of what we're working on, is making sure that this is not just a place for you to write or read for fun. If you want to get on here and people enjoy what you're doing, then we want you to be able to be compensated for it.
That's really radical.
And we understand that there's a lot of different kinds of engagement, right? So I'm going to just start naming all the people that I really like in life. So I'll say Octavia Butler. We'll pretend like I am her son. And I've read my mother's work, and I really appreciate it, but I've never thought I was as good of a writer as her. Maybe I write just on the side a little bit, and because my last name is Butler, I don't want to live in her shadow. So I publish under a different name. I publish it under Gregory Whiting, and I'm writing stories that are interesting, but maybe they need some editing help. And maybe there's somebody who's working in this world, reading different stories, who's an editor who wants to work on editing it, or says, hey, I'd love to co-write this with you because I really like the ideas that you're coming up with, but I think it could be shaped up a bit. So we would like to have people collaborate like that. That's an online collaboration, but we also want to do some real-life collaborations. What if you have a writer or a budding writer who needs help with structure but wants to work with people? Why don't we have writers' workshops at our conventions where maybe some of the people we've commissioned for work, some of the professionals, will do workshops with participants in real time, in real space, and people will develop community face-to-face as well as online.
So we've been talking a lot about... Sorry.
Go ahead.
About writing stuff. Are you guys going to be setting up sort of the back end for stuff like film or music or art? I mean, we talked about graphic novels.
Oh, absolutely. And there have already been, not everything has been released that we're working on, so I can just tell you that we are already actively working in those spaces as well. And that we will also be working in those spaces in terms of making sure that we have a platform for that as well. So, I've been thinking about the written word a lot because I like that for science fiction. I like movies as well. I love short stories for science fiction. But we want people to do cosplay as well. Maybe you do some amazing design and you release the blueprints for the cutouts of fabric that you use so that somebody else can create a similar character or something that has a similar fit.
So
that's cool.
In terms of so you're looking for, so right now, who are you looking to have participate? You want writers, you want artists, filmmakers, any kinds of creators to be participating in terms of, creating and adding to the story, or who is it that you want to have participating and in what ways?
I want the artistic equivalent of Mariah Carey involved in terms of singing, all the way down to someone who would burst into tears if they were invited to a karaoke party because they don't know how they'll get through it. I want people who think that they have, no talent in these spaces or nothing to provide to maybe cautiously engage. Maybe they're just reading or listening to music, and to eventually, either at a physical meetup or some kind of event that we're doing online where we incentivize collaboration, to have whatever it is that they need to comfortably engage with others and grow. I want people to read stories that in most cases they might not be interested in, but they decide to give it a little more time because they respect the platform, or maybe they respect the writer, or it said under genres, under meta tags that this was romance, and I love romance, so let me give this a shot. I want them to go through that and then find themselves, pleasantly surprised by what they're enjoying. I think for me personally, an ultimate measure of success would be if my mother cares about it, because she saw one of the Lord of the Rings movies with me, and it was almost like the Make-A-Wish Foundation. She was just never into that kind of stuff. So I really want everybody to get involved with this.
Wow. One of the things I was trying to think about in terms of who is the likely audience for this, and I was trying to think about you have people who are RPG players, and in some ways this sort of feels like part of an RPG. Certainly a cyberpunk setting is a popular RPG setting, and you have a specific sort of rules, although it is pretty open. Is there I think somebody on the FAQ had something about I don't really do I do RPGs around a table with various dice. Basically, I haven't done the other kinds. There was but somebody said on one of your FAQs that you guys had the what's the thing that folks do for the online role-playing collaborative thingies? Wow, I'm
really... I'm a little confused by what you're asking. Can you restate it?
Yeah. Kat, you know what I'm talking about? Like, there's some sort of web platform that people sometimes will use for extended.
Oh yeah, but it's just like the Twitch stream of D&D kind of stuff, right?
Well, in the meantime, I can explain the difference between Black Punk and Cyberpunk. That gives you some time to collect your thoughts.
No, that's
your
fine.
question.
I guess what I was thinking though is conversely is like you have the role. There's definitely like I think an appeal in this world for role playing folks, but possibly also for fanfic writing. I sort of wanted to see like a lot of the appeal for fanfic writers comes from like writing in an existing playground with characters that you already know and love and have a relationship with. So I was sort of like thinking about, talking with Kat, like, do you think that, like, is there an in here for folks from like the traditional, for lack of a better word, like the traditional fanfic writing community, or is it
absolutely.
sort of coming in for more people from like a role playing community? Because I think people are looking for
all of
different.
it.
They have different needs sometimes in what they're looking for a creative and story experience.
This actually
I
reminded.
can better answer your question now.
Sorry,
I'll speak to the fanfic portion first. There's definitely space for people who come from a more traditional fanfic background to come in and play with certain characters. So, for example, if you look at Cellarius, spelled like cells of a body, and then Arius as in hilarious minus the word hill, you can look up our Instagram, Cellarius2084. You can go to the YouTube site for Cellarius. You can go to our Twitter page, and all of these things will either have our video or links to videos, different trailers that we've made. One says "Where to," and it stars two unnamed people who are in one of the towers of the mega city, and this woman goes all the way down the elevator to what appears to be the ground floor. And there's a lot of different things that you see in that video that indicate different pathways for her in terms of what you would write. I don't want to give away the trailer per se, but you look at it, and from there you can give that person a name. Now, if you're like, look, that's not good enough for me. I need it to be like, watching an episode of Dragon Ball Z and then figuring out what I think should happen in the next episode. Well, then we have that for our flagship trailer with the main character named Idra, who is an African woman. I say African not as in the trope of Africa being a country, but Africa being a large region that doesn't have the same relationship with nation states after Cellarius has taken away the power grid. So the same borders don't really apply when you don't have the same infrastructure to recreate that. So Idra is an African woman who leads a group of people in a faction known as the Vindix, as in Vindicators. And what they do is they actively get people disengaged from the AI. So no more being plugged in and playing in the virtual world. No more, in their words or their perception of it, being a slave to the features that Cellarius provides to enhance people's lives. You can look through that trailer and you get a lot that you can work with. So I think that would be an answer to your question for sure.
Kat, you were saying?
I was just going to say, kind of following what you were saying, Alana, is that a lot of fanfic writers are writing because they really like that universe, or they really like those particular characters. Like there's a really thriving community of people that only write fan fiction about their Game of Thrones original characters, and that's a really big fandom there, and that's sort of like this collaborative role building thing where all of their OCs interact with each other. But then you have your Game of Thrones fanfic writers that just want to write about the characters in the novels. So it sounds like you're saying there's something for both.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's still an opportunity for them to work with some characters or ideas that people are familiar with. But I'll speak a little bit more to the question of, where is the value or what is the draw for them. So for the people that we've commissioned stories from or just art to work with in the first place, just the original work for hire contract, these people have been so excited with this project because they've never had this kind of creative freedom. They've never been told, at least by the traditional publishing entities, give this character the name that you want, the body type that you want, the race, the appearance that you want. These are people who've worked in Marvel Comics or DC, people who have encountered businesses in which, if the major character is a man, like a comic book character is a man and they have their own title, they've either had no women write that character or maybe one. And, 50, 60, 70 years for that character. We're telling them, you do what you want with it. We're telling them if this character is a woman, that's great. If you want to make that person young, great. If you want to make them not fit in with the traditional notions of how a person should appear in a lot of these movies and comic books, they can be overweight or very thin, or they can have an illness. They don't have to be glamorous. You can do that. That's a value that that a lot of these people aren't able to say that they're getting with these other arrangements. They're being editorialized, and what we're saying is we want you to keep it open.
How are you going to deal with, because I come from a fan fiction background, fandom is really good at totally distorting different things of your characters. Like there'll be fan art that gets progressively whiter or really focusing on different aspects of characters to the detriment of other positive characters. So how are you guys going to deal with that in terms of the collaborative space where now you've got users using other users' characters?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I have. And not just I, but the team. We've had a lot of conversations about this. So I'll give you at least two answers on it. One is that how we operate as a team within an organization that is flat or actively flattening, so we're working to make it non-hierarchical, is we're working to be a microcosm of the collaborative platform that we're building. So where we run into issues, those are opportunities for us to figure out how would that work as we expect other people to engage with this idea. So in a sense, we are, I guess, the original proving grounds or the pre-alpha for this project. The other thing about, how are we addressing the opportunity for people to whiten up characters or maybe, take away a narrative that's homoerotic, for certain characters because they're uncomfortable with it. I've done a lot of research on this, a lot of reading about different fandom communities and how that's working. I follow certain blogs. I think there's a Tumblr blog that I actually looked at before this job called Fandoms Hate People of Color. I remember the first time I ran into it, I thought it was a kind of a polarizing title. It's a very strong, it's a declarative statement. And I looked at the blog and found all these examples. They'd look at an artist, or they'd say, look at these storylines, or they'd come up with their own research. They say there's this many stories about Rey, but not very many stories about Finn, or there's this many stories about Kylo Ren and Rey, but not this many stories about Kylo Ren and this other character. And so that's given me a feel for the engagement. Yeah. So that's given me a feel for what's already happening out there, and I look at the responses that people have, and I've seen what's the strongest and most enduring element of this, and there's multiple blogs. There's like Fandoms Hate Black People, which as a black person, I look at that one and I really appreciate it because it's a validation of conversations I've had with friends or things that I've heard from friends when we're talking about our favorite shows or things we grew up with. The strongest thing about all of that is the community. It's the fact that people are actively engaging with this and that they're demystifying it and they're coming up with examples of why it's not working and then figuring out what they want to do with it. I don't look at the blog and get a lot of anxiety and think, oh no, they're destroying this idea, because I say, well, if there's all these people that are actually responding to this and figuring out what they want to do with it, then there's hope. we've talked about trolling. We've talked about the fact that you're going to have people who, instead of having like a racist character, want to have, you know, a racist, toxic way of engaging with the community, right? Like, it's not like violence or terrible things don't happen in this world. Where the concern would be for, I guess you would say, maybe a violence that goes against the narrative. You know, if people were to, somebody was going to say, well, the planet was wiped away. You know, all women were gone or something like that. We wouldn't allow that, and we've already addressed that at least in our first build of the community guidelines, and that's another document that you can download on our website. It was something that was co-developed between myself and one of the co-founders, Tyler Smith. You know, the people on the team, we don't all come from the same ideological background, so we have these conversations, and it's enriched our process. It's made it so that we can look at something like the community guidelines and know that we set that up as a document that was shared with the whole team to look at, suggest, put comments in, and kind of wrestle with until we all felt like, okay, this is good enough for now.
Yeah, I imagine you'll get to experience some use cases as they pop up. That fandom always surprises me, for good or for bad. So.
And I'm nodding my head. I'm in total agreement with you that it would definitely want to be challenged. We're trying to set it up so that some of the themes for what we're doing make it a little bit harder for people to engage in that stuff. I mean, I don't want, or not just myself, but the team and Igor who got this all started, we don't want it to be authoritarian per se. I mean, it goes against the principles of open source software and blockchain and whatnot for us all to have it extremely centralized. It's starting off centralized because we're the ones creating this platform, but the goal is for it to be truly decentralized storytelling. You know, there will, just as you asked me the question about trolling behaviors, there will be other people who ask those questions and who actively work to flag that kind of content or those kinds of behaviors.
So to bring to something that you said earlier about like blockchain technology, and you're talking about cyberpunk versus
Blockpunk. Blockchain,
yes, so
as a
blockchain
that. Aesthetic. Sure.
Yes.
So we have multiple streams at work, and people who are on the publishing stream. I believe Frank was the one who authored this title and worked on this concept on our Medium post. And as a team, we kind of worked on this idea like, well, how do we want to describe these things? And so one thing that we worked on as a team was this whole idea of like, what is the aesthetic? So we have this shared document that we're working on, figuring out what kind of articles we want to post. And this one is about Blockpunk versus Cyberpunk. So I'm reading from the document under scope. The scope for Blockpunk is global. The scope for Cyberpunk is local. The tone for Blockpunk is hopeful, while there's a Cyberpunk aesthetic is typically very nihilistic. And things are terrible. The views on technology are skeptical, whereas with Blockpunk they're neutral. And that fits what we're doing in terms of saying, like, we want you to tell us the story. The way power is typically organized in a cyberpunk aesthetic, if you think about Wayland Yutani Corp and the Aliens franchise, or the company in Blade Runner, which unfortunately I cannot remember the name of, so please chime in if you remember. It's centralized. For us, we're actually making it decentralized. Now, you have the AI, right? But we're having it decentralized by way of the factions. So you have humans, you have AI and other AI, smaller, or I would say lesser AI in terms of computational ability, fighting for power. And then you have hybrids. So the Homo Transcendus would be an example of like a hybrid faction. That would be what happens if you upload your body into a different physical form. Maybe a set of machinery that can change its form to look like an insect, or to fly like a plane, or to, be underwater. be in the oceans. You know, at that point, maybe you're not sleeping anymore. If your mind is uploaded into a different physical form, you wouldn't have the same metabolic needs or functions. So the exciting thing about that is we don't have to tell you what that means. Somebody will look at that and think that it means, you know, very little, and another person will look at that and kind of run with it to further explore all things related to the body. I think about some of my favorite science fiction films are by David Cronenberg, and he does what I would call are like body horror films.
Mm-hmm.
They're always about our fight with the body or the horror that comes from the body. And so I would love for David Cronenberg to work with this, or maybe the spiritual successor, somebody who also has a fan for that style as myself. Now, one thing that is different is Cyberpunk typically has, despite all the nihilistic style of it and how negative things can be, the color palette is often neon.
Mm-hmm.
You think about Blade Runner, you think about all these garish advertisements for Coca-Cola, and there's that famous image of a woman on the billboard ad, and it's all like neon. We're actually using muted colors for our palette to start with the aesthetic. We have a style guide that was created by our designer Octavian, who develops these T-shirts for us that are out of this world. You can see them on certain YouTube shows and whatnot, such as the actual person who started Consensus, our parent company. He loves these shirts. He just wore it at our big annual event, Ethereal, and people kept asking him about the shirt. And he said, you make an amazing shirt. I'll wear it. And that's why he's wearing it, because he likes the aesthetic, and he's a big fan of what we're working on.
That's super cool. Thank you. Yeah, we're coming up on the hour, and we tend to go about that long. Kat, do you have any last questions that you would want to ask for Gregory?
No, I think I'm trying to think, but all I can think about is when Amazon Worlds came out. I know there was a lot of conversation about how it kind of essentially monetized fandom, which is really based on a gift economy. So, but I mean, this isn't, and that was still like, it's sort of like a hybrid, because these are established brands and you could get paid for your stories, but you didn't have any ownership over your stories. So if you were an Amazon Worlds writer, you couldn't, say, repackage your short story book and then sell that from your personal website. So I guess I'm really curious about like the setup of how your creators can sort of monetize their own thing, because it sort of sounded like it would be like in the Cellarius like interface, or would it be like I can create a chat book of like my poems about this character and sell it on my Etsy site?
Good question. So I will first answer by giving you an example of something we've already done, and then I'll try and extrapolate from there with an example of what we can do. So one thing we've done is, for the artists that we've commissioned work from, is, a lot of them will have something that's a physical piece of work, and from there they'll digitize it. We'll say, we want the digital image. We want the rights to work with this, knowing that this is our most restrictive contract. As we iterate this and create this community, and as we create this platform, we will be less and less restrictive. We're just making sure that we're working within current laws, and that we are able to have something that people can look at and play with. But even with this structure, we're already doing something that they haven't had previously, which is, we're saying, okay, we have the rights to the digital image or images you've created for us. Anything that we want, though, that we've made 8 different things. The only things that we're keeping, or the only things that we're paying for, are the things that we're keeping. So let's say you made 8 different images for us, and we take 2 of them. You do what you want with the other 6. If you were working for Disney and you were working on a movie, let's say Black Panther, which is one of my favorite movies, and a Hallmark or at least a major tentpole in the Afrofuturist style for sci-fi, you could create all these different outfits for Black Panther and for Eric Killmonger and all these other people. You're not going to get a chance to own that. You're going to go with one thing that's going to be in the movie, and then that's it. You don't get to own the other work. That's in their vault forever. They might never use it. They might use it for a costume design that's never attributed to you, that's attributed to a completely different character. Like, oh, we like that vest. We'll put it on Goofy, even though you meant it for, somebody in like a Marvel Comics movie. The other thing is that we do that I would say is pretty radical is think about the physical art that you created. You did a painting and then you digitized it for us. We say that physical art, that's yours. You make money off of that for the rest of your life. We only ask for the first right of refusal. So if and when you choose to sell it, we want the ability to buy it from you at a fair market value. That's it. Keep your money. Make your money. Keep your art. As we go further along this path, as we learn more from the artists that we work with, as we actively engage with them to find out, what works best for them, how do we make sure that not only do you eat, but you thrive, that you have pride in what you're doing, that you keep coming back to us because you're enjoying the business relationship and you're enjoying the creative license that you have. We want to make sure that we continue to develop and change in a way that provides an advantage to them.
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, it does.
And if we have time, I'd like to quickly share. Oh, go ahead.
I actually was supposed to say I've forgotten Kindle Worlds existed. So, thank you for that deep cut because that's sort of an interesting thing to think about. Sorry, you were saying, Gregory?
So oftentimes I think about this project in terms of what do other people not understand about it, or what do other people think about it in terms of value? Because obviously I'm inside of it right now. I'm one of the people who's working on this and who's responsible for developing this project. But I think about, what would my nephew like, or what would the young Gregory like? And so I think about the fact that when I was a kid, when I was in high school, I would look at things like Dragon Ball Z, which was very popular with a lot of kids, but they had a cult following among a lot of black nerds. We used to write our own stories. We used to do sketches. We used to spend time in the lunchroom talking about what we thought would happen in the next episodes. And I realize this now as an adult. As a child, I didn't really think about it too much. But we also figured out which characters were black. So Skeeter and Doug was black.
Oh,
Piccolo
for sure.
was black. Panthro and the Thundercats was black. And it was it was core canon for us. You sat down at the table and you knew that. It wasn't a thing we really had to discuss. We had agreed that Popo or Mr. Popo was racist and therefore not black, or we didn't identify with it. But we made it our own. You know what I mean? And I'm just that's just a small example. I'm not even talking about what are women doing when they're looking at these things? You look at the fighters team or whatever for Dragon Ball Z, it's all men. But the only other person who's a woman is an android, like Android 18. There's very few of the characters that are formidable fighters. I think recently we just had their first Saiyan character who's a woman. So, and that's, probably 30 years later from when the franchise began, or 40 years. So I look at all those things, and I think that if we can skip time, we don't have to wait 40 years for people to get what they need of the narrative, then we're really going to have a lot of success if we leave it open to that. And I have a lot of faith in that, just based on what the younger Gregory would be proud of at this point. If this was available to me at that time, I'd be super excited about it.
Well, thank you again. I think this is a really interesting proposition for folks who are looking for a creative space to write, draw, role play that really wants their participation and will let them to continue to have a piece of it, rather than just sort of drawing their energy and either ignoring it or yelling at them for caring too much or criticizing them for making everything gay. A platform.
Can I speak to that really quickly?
Yes. Sure. Yes.
you can have gay characters, you can have gay relationships. I see that a lot in the fandoms, that oftentimes there's a lot of bi, queer, gay, lesbian erasure in storylines. There's characters that clearly have affection for one another, and people will ship certain relationships, like, what is it, Finn and Poe, or Bucky and Captain America. So there's space for that. You want to put that, in your stories. That's great. We're not gonna stop that. If somebody else is writing a story that doesn't have very much of that, then that's fine too. We want everybody to kind of find community for the things that they're most interested in here, as long as it follows the community guidelines.
Yeah. I think like people saying yes, please feel free to make everything gayer is the right approach to take with fans and with the world at large, and with all meals, with really anything you engage with in the world. Make it more diverse, make it more LGBTQ inclusive, have more diversity of all different kinds, and have that be something that you guys are enthusiastic about and want people to see and view as a core value of what you're doing. And I think that sounds really cool. So let our listeners know, how can they sign up for to be part of the alpha test or the alpha release of the world?
Yeah, if you want to have an opportunity to have say in what happens next as we're building this platform, if you're an artist, if you're a creative, if you're a crypto enthusiast, if you are someone who just likes to read different stories, go to our website at cellarius.network, Cellarius, Cellarius.network, Network. And it's the first button under the logo, which is an eye. It looks like it has like omnidirectional eyelashes. It's just these lines coming out of the eye. It's very creepy and beautiful at the same time. They'll say, apply to our alpha. Click on it. Put information in there. I am collecting demographic information on people who engage, but it's purely opt-in. I ask that you do it, but you are not obligated to do it. And the information for that would be like, oh, what's your age, or where do you live? Like, what country are you coming from? What's your gender? What race do you identify with? And we've tried to keep those categories open. If for some reason you're putting in demographic information and it's not descriptive enough for you, you think there's something we should have asked that we didn't ask, give us that feedback. We are not going to be like other companies. We want to hear from you. It's a prize for us. And it's to your benefit, because for a change, you'll be working with an entity that's specifically designed to respond to what you want and make sure that you get more of it.
Cool, thank you. And Kat Overland, where can our readers, listeners, I should say, keep up with your own critical work?
You can find me on Twitter at @DogUnderwater, and you can find my reviews at Women Write About Comics and at Ms. Onsen.
Oh, cool. Film criticism, too. That's great. Really, really glad to hear it. Well, thank you guys for joining me again, and I'm looking forward to keeping an eye on the Cellarius Universe. Big project.
Can I add our Instagram and Twitter as well?
Yes, do that.
Our Instagram is Cellarius2084, kind of like 1984, but, a little bit later in time. Cellarius2084 is the Instagram. Cellarius2084 is the Twitter. We have a Medium blog, so you can get all these different posts about how are we setting this up or what are we doing next, so you can learn a little bit more about how we're organizing this process of universe platform creation. And then you can email me directly if you want to. If you have questions, criticisms, feedback, you want to know when is this alpha information going to be available, email me directly at gregory@cellarius.network. Before you do so, please check out the frequently asked questions at the bottom of our website, cellarius.network.
Well, thank you, guys. For anyone who came to the podcast late, you can listen to the whole thing on our website probably tomorrow. We are on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher, all at Graphic Policy. Just look us up on Graphic Policy wherever you get podcasts, and you can all listen to the podcast from the beginning there. Next week is oh my God, Deadpool is getting released on Friday. So next week, I know that friend of the show, Sarah Rasher, will be joining me to talk about Deadpool, which we're getting to see together. We'll probably have another guest who I will announce soon as well for that. And then there'll be even more to come in the new month as summer is upon us. There's a couple of really cool series that are launching. I'm going to get some interviews with those writers on the show. So again, this is Ilana with Graphic Policy Radio. Be sure to check out graphicpolicy.com. Every day we have new news, reviews, views, essays. I have a post coming up probably today, actually taking a look at the first 2 issues of Gail Simone's new series Domino over at Marvel. You can find me on Twitter, Ilana_Brooklyn. I'm on Twitter all the damn time. Very easy to reach, sad to say. Thank you. And as we always like to say at Graphic Policy, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.